I don't know how to teach what I'm finding. Nobody can follow along. It's very old material. In this video, what I'm going to do is talk about a common tie point in Genesis that is repeating. What I want to describe is what I can see. I'm going to use an analog here. What I see in Genesis is like I guess I would call it a conveyor belt, a story conveyor that's rolling along, but I'm going to have to describe that to you. My name is Dan Paulson. Welcome to the video. Genesis is man-made in the most clever way, but it's also incredibly old and it's complicated. Today, people don't get it. What do we have? We have three conditions in the material: the believers and the non-believers. That's two, believers and non-believers. What's the third one? The called ones. The called ones are going to be very few people. And even if you have the right brain type to figure this out, that doesn't mean you're going to want to have any interest in it and try to figure it out. So we've suddenly dropped this into a very small group of people that are going to have interest in it or that are going to have the capacity to understand it. Genesis is man-made, and it's very obvious that it is so, but only if you understand how it's read. So if you're reading them at face value and teaching them like a theist would do, you got a lot of explaining to do. It just doesn't make sense. So an atheist is going to say, no, that doesn't make any sense. It didn't happen. What neither side realizes is that there is something nested in the verbiage that is not plain language, and it's for the people that seek the path to inner peace. I'm going to leave that right there to try to keep the video as short as possible while still covering the information. What I want to do is talk about this story repeating that I'm seeing. There's parts in here, component parts of the story that I see that are constantly repeating. And as I play it out and I understand what they're doing and how this plays out in the mind and how this is actually something that is it's a pathway for me to take if I know how to interpret it. And it's very difficult. You have to be able to interpret it in your own head. What I can do is describe to you how I have discovered and what I have discovered to do with the material. But right now, it's just this repeating part. What I'm going to do is show you something that is in Genesis. I want to read through these. These are all I've captured these and copied and pasted them from the King James Version of Genesis to a separate document. Let's just go ahead and look at them. What I want to do here is, I'm going to say I called this document Offspring, Seed, Stars, What is Named, Bundle of Memories, Agreements, Mote in the Eye. Chapter 9, this is with Noah appearing on the new earth. God's talking to him. And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. Chapter 12, Abram, plain of Moreh, Shechem, leaves land of famine, and Pharaoh wants his wife. You know what? Instead of explaining these, I'm going to jump through and just read one after another. It'll sound better that way. This is from chapter 9, chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 15, chapter 17, chapter 22, chapter 24, 26, 32, and 48. And this goes everywhere from Abram to Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and Rebekah as well. These are just a few. Now let me read this is the tie point. I establish my covenant with you and your seed after you. Unto your seed will I give all this land. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall the seed also be numbered. Look now toward the heaven and tell the stars, if thou art able to number them. And he said to them, so shall your seed be. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. That in blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And your sand shall possess the gate of his enemies. Remembering these are all a common story point that are repeating. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, you are our sister. Be the mother of thousands of millions, and let your seed possess the gate of those which hate them. Okay, what do we have in common there? Seed, multiple seeds, stars, all kinds of things, offspring, massive offspring. So you would read that and go, well, this just means it belongs to you and to everybody after you. And that's how it sounds as the story. But if you play it out in the psyche, it's going to mean something different, and it's going to be very complicated. What I'm going to do first, actually, it's not that complicated. It's just going to be weird. But what I want to do is, instead of describing what they're doing here in Genesis, because it's a technique that is common in antiquity. They're teaching something that is very common. However, they're doing it in an analogous way that's biblical, that sounds like it sounds right there, the seed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a place called the Tao Te Ching. It's a short book of material from a teacher called Lao Tzu. That's about 500 years before Jesus. It's after Genesis, obviously. But what I'm going to suggest is that the exact same teaching is here, except that it sounds differently. It's in different verbiage. However, if we interpret it the same way, we're going to find out that there's one common teaching in all of humanity and all of mankind. And if we learn what this is here in Lao Tzu's work, it's going to be easier to understand exactly how the mind works and what this is. And then we come back to Genesis and look at it and go, they're using a different verbal technique, a different carrier shell, but they're teaching that same thing right there. So let's go learn it from Lao Tzu. And I might reference Buddha as well. Again, this is a common teaching. If you're stuck in one religion thinking it's right over others, you don't have it figured out. There's one common teaching, and the masters know this. The carrier shells, the people who worship the religions, they don't necessarily. Abrahamics, not at all. All right, first let me give a quick description of what the Tao Te Ching is. Look how small this book is. Taoism is a huge religion in the East, not here, but it is. What we have here is 60, what do we have? We have 81. 81 like stanzas, pages. Each one of them is numbered on its own. So you can see that it's not very big. What this represents is his pivotal work, though, and it would be, honestly, treat this as the guru. Treat this as Lao Tzu himself, as if you were going up and asking him, what is life about? How come it is the way that it is? And he begins to teach you in a cryptic manner. He's not going to say it in plain language. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to interpret it and put it in plain language. Back then, you would want to hear this and then have to go off and ponder it. Somebody's not going to just tell you the answer. You have to go think about it. And in doing so, you're engaging your mind, you're engaging your thought processes, you're wiring your brain, you're learning it at a more experiential level as opposed to just being told academically. In fact, right here, the very first one, what do we have? The first one is this cryptic idea that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, and the name that can be not named is not the eternal name. So right off the bat, we go, wow, that's some weird stuff. What does that mean? You have to really process it through. You have to think about it and use different techniques, knowing they're living through it in their heads and we're not. We're looking at it and not really giving it the right treatment. The Tao, that's the way. That's what I want to understand. This understanding, this pathway. The pathway that can be told is not the eternal pathway. Well, I want the eternal pathway, so where do I get that? If the pathway that can be told is not the eternal one, which one is the eternal one? It's the one that's taken. What you're going to find out is that this is a personal mental trip, and this first step right here tells us that this is going to be a mental trip for you personally. If you go to church and listen to somebody preach, you don't have it right. You're listening to somebody. That's the blind leading the blind. That's the Pharisees teaching, well, not the deeper teaching, not the real teaching. In this case, what we have is, in Taoism, it's telling us in this case that this is going to be for you mentally. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. That seems a bit obscure, but if we move ahead, what we're going to see is two more things. The unnameable is the eternally real, and naming is the origin of all particular things. Now, we have to go back to verse number 1. It's mental. It's us. This is my life experience. This is almost like a creation story without a God. I'm starting out. The unnameable is the eternally real. I'm a child in the Eden. Naming is the origin of all particular things. That would be like first sin. I am now beginning to learn. I'm beginning to have life experiences, and as a result, I lose the happiness. Naming is the origin of all particular things. In a different translation, it says, the named is the mother of 10,000 things. You have to be careful. Chinese doesn't translate directly into English. Sometimes it's better to have 4, 5, 6 different good, known good translations from different authors. Sometimes you read between one book and the other, and they don't even sound like the same thing. So in this case, we realize, okay, naming is the origin of all particular things. When you say naming is the named is the mother of 10,000 things, suddenly to me that opens it up into, okay, this is my mental experience. Buddha's first verse in the Dhammapada, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. If you think back on your life, think about it this way. When you were born, you didn't know anything. And you began to learn, and gradually you began to learn simple things that were benign. Yellow, red, banana, orange, yum, yuck, happy, sad, mine, toys, play. There's a point in time where we're developing as children and we're naming things, but it's very benign. But at some point we leave that behind. We go off and grow up in life and have our own experiences, and we begin to learn things like, that hurts, that sucks, I don't like them, I don't trust that anymore, I feel shame over this. We begin to take on all of those things, and that right there, naming is the origin of 10,000 things. That's it right there. That's it right there. Naming, we're becoming a bundle of memories. We're becoming a mass of memories. And that's exactly what we live through. They're teaching us way back then that naming is the origin of all particular things, the 10,000 things, or even more. Now, if we take that same understanding, first of all, where is it? In the teaching, it's right in the beginning. They're telling you, they're setting up conditions. They want you to know that you're a product of your thinking, your judgments. That's why, what did I name this? Offspring, seeds and stars. That's because that's what's there in the Bible, in Genesis. What is named? Yeah, I'm naming something. The bundle of memories, that's what we are. The agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz, we live through those. The mote in the eye, what's going to have to be cleared out later. All of that is what these are. I will establish a covenant with you and your seed after you. Unto your seed I will give all this land. What is the land? So they're teaching in a different style here. In this style right here, it's not meant to have any sort of influence over the population. It's meant to only have a personal influence over the seeker. You go find the information here, you have it. The way that the Abrahamic material works is different. The carrier shell is designed in such a way to create a belief system for the majority of the population to live through and to carry that around. So religion itself is created then, but it's made on a template that is repeating. When we see these happening, we're going to see that they're happening at the beginning of a cycle. We see right after Noah and the flood. Your offspring is there. You've started pure. You're going to become filled with all of these offspring. But the offspring are your memories, what you know, what you hold on to. That bundle of judgments, all of that is what the offspring are. And they're going to from a child, there's a very few. As we get into adulthood, God, there's piles of them. We have all those judgments. There we are. How many? As many as stars in the, well, maybe not that many. That's a bit over the top. But they're analogous terms letting us know that from each one of these healing points, I'm starting over. When Abraham is told the same thing, that's when God turns him from Abram to Abraham, that's the calling. That starts there. So you see that at each transition, Noah healing, Abram start, Abraham. And I've got to stop and make sure to say very specifically, Abram is all of us, from childhood all the way through life, inner being corrupted, moved on, until God calls Abraham. We become Abraham as the person that goes, I have become a product of my judgments. I can do something about that. We flip the switch on what we know and what we understand. That's when we go from Abram to Abraham. We begin to turn inward and begin to heal things. We begin to destroy Sodom. Isaac, Jacob, their wives, at each of these new beginnings, they're being told this land becomes yours. So on the template, what that means is I've healed now. I've purged myself or purged something, but there's more up there. There's more in there. So what's happening in the template then is it's rolling that idea over and over again. That's why it's not just going through one time. A flood healing up to, I think the Bible up to chapter 11 was probably original at one time that was different. You can see it has the flood. There was entire purging. But then they put in there's a rainbow. There will never be a flood again. Why would they do that? You look in history and everybody was having flood stories in their creation. Genesis wasn't first, but they said, you know what? Everybody's got a flood story. This is it. No more. I will never do it again. It's almost like Islam later on saying there will be no more prophets. Muhammad is the last one. We keep evolving religions. They keep moving along. And at some point in time, someone's trying to put checks and balances on them, but it doesn't work anyway. You understand what I mean by that, though, right? I'm talking about the God of Abraham. If somebody with authority says the God of Abraham himself says no more floods, and you want to come along and piggyback on that God, you have to accept that God already said that, so you can't keep coming up with flood stories. It's a way to kibosh it. All right, so what I see happening here, honestly, and I compare it with my own life, coming from a place where I had a lot of things that I was hanging on to, and I had a lot of things I had to let go of. When I finally got what was going on, I'd let go of something big, and there was a healing that took place, and I just felt wonderful. It was like, oh my God, this is a fresh start. But at that point in time is like where Abraham is, Isaac is, Jacob is. Each one of those represents new iterations of us. We're not the same person we were as a child or as going to school and grade school and then going to high school. We become different, more experienced iterations of ourselves. And that's what they're doing here. But as they go through the healing process, each one of these people is the next called person on the healing journey, honestly. It would be called a monomyth, but it's not exactly right. This is a religious genre of something that would be similar. It compares to a monomyth in this way. The monomyth, Greek mythology and other mythologies are created on this template. This religion is also created on the template. So there's one mono template that is in place. And in this case, it's the called hero each time that happens. But what it represents in going over and over again is the idea that you don't just go resolve one thing and your life is better. Typically, you have many things to resolve. I got this, I got that, I've got to make amends here, I've got to take care of that, this bugs me. If you're the called person, if you're not, that might not even be an issue. You just live through your experiences, thinking that you're using free will. Meanwhile, you're not at all using free will. You're just choosing from within your life experiences. You're floating around in a box. And it looks like free will because you're moving around freely inside of there, but you're inside of a box. So there's a fixed set of components that we're all working with. I think free will comes in, if it's there, comes in the idea of recognizing that, understanding it, and then changing the way we perceive things, which then changes our past. That's when free will, if it ever is taken. But then what are you living through? Then you go on living through the cause and effect of the new emotional state of the feelings, which is exactly what we're trying to do here. To get in God's good graces, you forgive the odd against your brother. In order to have a better flow in life, we need to resolve the issues that are upstairs. That's the real way to look at it. And it's not a single trip. So what they're going to have here is you go from iteration to iteration. I go from Abram, I start out, and I have my life experiences. My inner self, Sarai, becomes corrupt. Later on, I get called, I'm getting temptations again. I'll show that here real quick. There's a couple of there's more common things in the Bible. There's repeating things in Genesis that I want to point to right here that are showing cyclical things going on. And it represents, even though the story sounds different, it's on that template. It's me starting over again, and I'm going to, whatever I become after this point, this new collection of experiences, a lot of it is my old ones, actually, isn't it? It's still a lot of your old ones. You've resolved something, you're turning inward, you're starting to heal, you're starting to take the journey. But you're going to find out that there's many monsters to kill, not just one. So this path is going to be continually repeated through the material. If you went to Hindu material, that would be called reincarnation. You don't call it that here. But what happens in Hindu material, if you don't interpret it, they think that they're going to come back spiritually again and again. In the same way, Abrahamic material has some spiritual, supernatural things going on, so do they in Hinduism, except the idea is that you continue to repeat here, and each time you come back, you get an opportunity to wash off more each time. Where if you turn it inward, you realize it's not about a physical life, it's about it's a personal, spiritual life experience. These are iterations of me. Reincarnation happens each time I go back and go, you know what? I got molested. I had to admit to that. Whew, I got that taken care of. One time I stole $20 out of my grandma's purse. She's passed on, but I feel guilt. how do I resolve that? I have to go figure out some way to absolve that. I've got to go return something back to the cosmos in a way that's bigger than I took from. I have to somehow absolve myself of guilt feelings. That all of those, whatever they may be, this relationship, that habit, that whatever takes you off course, honestly, it's going to be very personal for each person. There's going to be a lot of common things, actually, as well. I'm being very, light on my description here. I'm not getting into much detail. What you have to do is look at your own life and determine what bothers and hurts you. And all of the things, what we need to understand is that we're flowing and continually living through a collective that is based on the nature of these. Whether they are consciously active or not doesn't matter. As long as they're there and you can bring them up and they have a certain memory and a feel to them that is a derogatory feeling, they are constantly living and guiding you in life, even if they're not playing out in your mind at that time. They're not deactive as long as you can pull them up and feel them. They're in the background just quietly. You're not paying attention to them, but they're still doing what they're doing, flowing in an energy collective that matches the nature of them. But we gave them that nature. It's a tricky thing. We have to get out of that. We have to rename and rethink the things that happen to us until we don't have the emotional charge. The emotional charge is what creates our continual life. Okay, so that's why the cycle repeats. And I'll just tell you basically what the cycle is going to be. We'll find it in the stories here, that there's going to be somehow a fresh start, a calling of a male and a female that's purged out, that there's going to be a corruption or an effort at corruption of that, and that there's going to be a division that happens, and that there's going to be something that is created that is not good, and it's going to have to be destroyed or taken over. It might take over at first, but you'll get it back. That is going to be, whether it's a city or whatever, a hairy brother, somehow something that really all of them are going to represent an early self in the material that you're trying to defeat. It is the new person saying, you know what, I'm sick and tired of that life. But that old self is so habituated. It's like, nanny, nanny, boo-boo, gotcha. Can you defeat me? It's a struggle to do that. Let's take a look at a couple of other things that are in, let me see here. I'm going to go to mother of occurs 3 times in Genesis. And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. So this was the very beginning of Genesis. And Genesis, I'm going to say at least 1 through 11 existed before 12 on. It sounds different. It's written different. It has, although there's some additions to it. There's 2 creation stories and there's 2 callings of Noah. He's told twice what to bring on the boat, 2 different things. One time just 2 pair and one time 7 pair. Anyway, we've also got where the conversion of Sarai to Sarah is. So this is the wife of Abram to Abraham. So at the same time, Abraham is being converted from Abram, Sarah is being converted from Sarai. So this represents the next iteration of us. From our Abram and Sarai self that got corrupted to a healing process till we get down here to 17. We're going to get ready to go on we're getting ready to go on a healing process. We get down to chapter 24, mother of thousands of millions. That's Rebecca, Isaac for marriage. So there's another point where the inner being is being told that they're going to be the mother of all. There's another thing down here, giving up one's wife out of fear. It's the same characters. Chapter 12, Abram, having been called by God and was placed in something got wrong out of there, land of famine, and he went to Egypt. Okay, so what happens, he says they're going to Egypt. God's already gone, left the scene. This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will say, you're alive. Please tell them that you're my sister. And of course, the woman was then taken into Pharaoh's house. So here we have Abram just gave up his wife out of fear to Pharaoh, who was very happy with her. And he entreated Abram well for her sake, and he gave him sheep and oxen and he-asses and men-servants and maid-servants and she-asses and camels. So he paid Abram very well for his wife, who he genuinely thought was Abram's sister, according to the story. But what happens? Cyclical pain ensues, and the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. He kicks them out, tells them to go, and tells everybody to leave him alone. Okay, what do we have here later with Abraham? And Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she's my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So we got the same thing going with the same individual. This is your early self, Abram, converted into your searching self, Abraham. And what do we have? The same thing is happening. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she's my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream at night and said to him, behold, you are but a dead man, for the woman which you've taken, she's a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation? He's the one that said, she's my sister, and she, even herself, said, he's my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocency of my hands I have done this. So there we have an interesting story. Let's move on here. They have a son. Where is he? There's a famine in the land. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? What is there for Abram? A famine in the land, where he's put. And let me provide my interpretation of what I believe famine in the land to be, a good thing. Eden was famine in the land. When Jesus tells us to become poor in spirit, the land, from where you live from your experience, from the mote in your eye. If the mote's there, there's not a famine there. You want it devoid of. In all cases, they're getting back to the idea that you want to have, that's a pure, when you see famine in the land, then what you're seeing is a mind that is not yet full of those judgments. It's a good thing, but we move on from that. We don't stay there. We go on and have experience. That's normal. That's what happens in these stories. So we see a repeat there in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, into Gerar. And what do we have down here? And Isaac dwelt in Gerar. And the men of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, she's my sister, for he feared to say, she's my wife. Okay, so now what we're going to see here is right again, we've got this going on where he's claiming that she's his sister out of fear. And we see that it was Abraham, and we know those are the same person. There's no question about it. God changed the name, Abram to Abraham. However, what we don't know is that Isaac is also an iteration of ourself after a healing. This is a new part of us. And and who is Rebekah, the inner self? Because she's fair to look upon. My inner self is easily corruptible. And it came to pass, when he'd been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out at a window and saw, and behold, they were sporting, making out behind the shed. And Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, of a surety she is your wife. Why did you say she was your sister? And Isaac said, because lest I die for her. I didn't want to die for her. And Abimelech said, what is this that you've done to us? One of my people might have lightly have lain with your wife, and you should have brought guiltless upon us. So he charged all his people, sent them away. Okay, so what we have, honestly, is very weird. This idea that somebody's constantly giving up their wife. The only way that can make sense to me is that they're iterations of us, and you can see along the way that at first time there was a corruption, got animals and slaves. Second time, the corruption was about to happen, but it got interrupted before the corruption occurred. Still got stuff for it, but didn't have to give up your inner self as a result of it. The last time, even though so the idea isn't that we are in fear giving up ourselves. This is us living a life, and it's easy for your inner self to become corrupted by what you experience. And along the way, at first we do. Second time, we interrupt it. Third time, you know what? It's a non-issue. So there's an iteration of a healing process going along as these stages happen. All right, so maybe I can bring this full circle now in the conveyor story. So what I see here is Yeah, if you had a conveyor belt going around and around and you saw that there's a metal attachment that continually repeats, you would see that and you would know that it's coming around. However, if you saw that coming around and each time it came around it was a different color, it was silver, then it's blue, then it's red, then it's green, you'd go, is that the same thing? I'm not sure, but there's still a pattern there. You can now start taking this and stretching it out. Take a bunch of these conveyors, all with different colors, and have one of them maybe 10 steps, one of them 15 steps, one of them 7 steps, something like that, a certain amount of numbers that are going to be repeated, and then stretch them together so that the repeat is starting to it's becoming so obscured, it's hard to see what's going on. That's how the story's working. That repeat is happening, but it's layers into the material, and you have to get into honestly, the interpretation of how it plays out in the psyche in order to see it. If you don't do that, you can't see it. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. I'm just sitting here yammering with you going, what the hell's this dude talking about? You have to see it yourself. Those are the patterns, though, that I'm spotting these right here and identifying what they are and being able to say that all of these times, every time you see where this is happening, that's a repeat in the cycle that's happening right there. When you're being told this is all going to belong to you, it might bear in mind it could be good or it could be bad. It's all going to belong to you. Your choice. Our conscious choices is what gives it to us. It's going to belong to us. Even our first life that we don't like, it belongs to us because we made those choices. We just did so without awareness. So, okay. The cycle that's repeating is we start out, there's cyclical pain. You start out pure or presumably pure, but then you move on and have experiences. And because of those experiences, you pick up things along the way. You have cyclical pain as a result, and now you have bad things happen. You divide. You must now turn inward in order to defeat an element that has gone bad, a city, an early self, an early something like that. That all of the story's always going to be coming down on that template right there. But it's going to follow analogs in a way that always makes sense. When it's time to destroy a city, that's your early self. When it's time to destroy an enemy, that's a part of yourself. When it's time to get your land back, that means go do whatever it takes to get your mind back, which might mean destroy the things that are preventing you from living peacefully in your own mind, which is what? Our memories. The Bible is teaching us the same thing if we get to that level, but it's so hard and it's so abused. Anyway. All right, questions, comments? I'd love to hear them. See you in the next video.